Welcome to the 2020 test of Alberta's economic resilience. This program has been developed for you as a byproduct of information that I received from you. We've assembled it into a series of 5 episodes. We're going to talk about the significant downturn in economies, not just Alberta, but economies overall, how it's been uneven across locations and sectors. We'll get deep into what's happening here in Alberta, and we'll also discuss the relevance and the potential for quick recovery. I'm your host. This is a little bit of color about who I am. I know many of you, but then there are many of you that are visiting us for the first time. And this is the program objectives. This is going to be, as I mentioned earlier, your assessment, including your comments about Alberta's economic diversification and diversification in general. Episode 1 will be dedicated to your sentiment and your views. They count on the status of our economy, on how sentiment has changed since 2015, on factors influencing your sentiment and your comments to bring clarity and additional insight. In additional episodes, we'll be talking about locations and sectors, what's going on in the innovation ecosystem, and then summary recommendations. So again, welcome. We here in Alberta, like you elsewhere, are weathering the pandemic and a severe downturn in our economies. The situation is serious. Lives matter and are being lost. But so is the loss of jobs and business confidence. The state of the economy and its recovery warrant certainly our full attention, and that's what I want to share and discuss with you, the results of our survey and of this program, 2020 Test of Alberta's Economic Resilience. Here in Alberta, the downturn is more complicated, driven not only by measures to contain the virus, but compounded by global, regional, and local forces that are transforming our economy, or should be, and maybe yours too. So pay attention. Over the next few weeks, I'll be sharing with you what you have shared with me about your economy, about change, and recommendations. Yes, this is your economy, the source of jobs and income, the source of taxes and public services, including education, and certainly here in Alberta, health, and here in Canada overall. The forces and sources of change on the economy are usually cited as technologies, substantial, sustaining, and painful, and no easier to manage than is a virus. Add in the substantial barriers to diversification and recovery, particularly in the oil and gas industry, and it's no wonder that people are concerned. What are the options, and what can be done? Well, that's what I'm here for, not to lecture you, but to share with you what you are telling me about your economy and change. For starters, let's look at the cause for change, the big picture, the status of the economy today, and how it compares with years past, going back to 2015. This monitor on economic resilience on the left points to a low of 2.15 this recent October on a scale of 1 to 5, with 4 to 5 being resilient. This is equivalent to a report card grade of D. I'm ignoring for the moment the rating on the right of Alberta's innovation ecosystem. We'll be returning to that in episode 4. What are the portions of those who have viewed the economy as resilient compared with those who have not? This slide shows the proportion of you viewing the economy as resilient and those viewing it as not. Most, more than 73% of you, view the economy as not resilient, or roughly 3 out of 4 of you. Only 21% view the economy as resilient, with 6% on the fence, that is neutral. This is why I refer to this as a bipolar, or 2 clusters. We've got those that view it as very resilient, and those that view it not. Those in the middle, neutral, is important and reflects the degree of uncertainty. Uncertainty is very, very low, and it's changed. It's down from 28% in 2015. Meaning whatever has occurred has driven people into one cluster or another. Not resilient has actually increased from 62% in 2015 to 73% today. As I'll show you in a moment, the grade of D, or 2.15, represents a significant dip since last tested in 2019. What are the contributors to this reversal in progress since we started taking diversification seriously enough to start monitoring it since 2015, on how to go about doing it, on how to measure it, or even where to find others to emulate? where to find others that may well have already been able to diversify a similar economy? Well, Texas comes to mind and is often mentioned. Hasn't it progressed in diversifying off oil and gas, now that it's in aerospace and other industries? Well, we know it well. Indeed, it is similar, yes. But it differs in many other ways. And in many ways, it has ready access to low-cost labor from Mexico. It has savvy generations of wealth and committed investors. It has an engaged commercial investment bank. It has federal defense contracts. It has coastal ports. And it also has warm weather. Alberta's well-known and frequent booms and busts have been attributed to the price of oil and from time to federal government interference. NEP comes to mind, and pipeline licensing. Is this a cycle that governments can fix? Well, certainly not alone. Well, as we'll see, Albertans are of mixed mind on what role government should play in fixing the cycle, that is, in diversifying the economy. Alberta and Canada are not alone in being exposed to this cycle. This is a global cycle. Energy worldwide is a volatile, cyclical, and vulnerable industry. Great when up, but when down, hope and patience have prevailed for the expected recovery, but perhaps not now. I, for one, believe we should measure what we value. Like the weather, I wanted an index, not just to measure, but to share, and rivet people's attention on resolving the boom-bust cycle between elections. Something that would help sustain public interest. Unfortunately, there is no agreed-upon standard for measuring economic diversity as there is for the weather. And it's important enough that we should be able to get a monitor regularly, almost on call. So I asked around, many discussions with governments, a lot of literature research, and many meetings with academia about what existed or what could be designed. To cut to the point, there was no agreed-upon measure, at least none that I could find, or that others could point to me as existing. There's lots of research, but no apparent partner to help me in developing one. The best measure I could find was a measure of the mix of industry revenues contributing to gross domestic product, or GDP. That was, however, inadequate as a public measure, and that the public didn't understand GDP. And regardless, I was told there was no standard for measuring GDP, or even data for monitoring progress over time. So ultimately, out of frustration, I opted for the obvious, to monitor the views of those who lived in the economy. You, the workers, the owners, the professionals and their clients, the voters and consumers of the economy. Hence the sentiment survey. It's fascinating. Personalization seems to be the driver today as a byproduct of what technology is now allowing us. The sentiment survey seems like an obvious, to ask people who are actually experiencing the economy to give us their views. This survey, which we've designed, is conducted each spring and fall, and it has been since the fall of 2015, with a break between the fall of 2019 and the spring of 2020. This past October's survey differed by including the views of others outside of Alberta, although they're not reflected in this graph. This graph only shows the views of those in Alberta. The survey also differed in the reporting by adding this, a personal presentation of the findings and your recommendations, versus what I had distributed in the past, which was a report. And I'm not even sure how many actually read it. But I'm getting views from you, from the network of over 27,000 that we communicate with, that you would prefer to have an audiovisual presentation, and hence this attempt and these episodes. Let's see how things look today compared with year after year since 2015. Note, since 2015, when we began the monitoring, NDPs was elected and unelected in Alberta. Climate change has come to the fore. Pipeline delays and protests have come and hopefully gone. And COVID continues to whack us since the past spring. Resilience has been showing little volatility. It's been pretty consistent, pretty flat from season to season, year to year, staying between these two levels, almost straight across. There's been gradual, slight improvement, rising to a high of 2.49 in the spring of 2018, or a grade of C-. The current big downturn in the fall of 2020, which is now, has occurred since the spring of 2019. Why? Your comments provide some clarity and insight, as illustrated here. The sentiment cloud up in the upper left-hand corner highlights the most frequent words used in your comments to the overall status of the province's economic resilience. The comments are drawn from those who rated the economy as not very resilient, which show up at the bottom here, and those who rated it as very resilient up here on the top. Central Alberta commented among the 2% that viewed it as very resilient that we have the highest GDP per capita in the province. Those who viewed it as somewhat resilient in southern Alberta have noted that the economy appears to be ticking along, for some better than others, wondering whether this is opportunity or, I think they meant good luck. When we look at the neutral, while diversity is improving, largely forced by the realities of the demise of the hydrocarbon energy sector, Albertan investors continue to lack vision. Those, the dominant force, the 73% that saw the province as not resistant, were pretty consistent. The economy and government actions are overly dependent on what happens in oil and gas. And for the not very resistant, when we look at northern Alberta, way too much reliance coming from policymakers on fossil and fuel industry, little recognition of other industries, namely those that are going to benefit from the shift to the green-based economy and the tech-based sectors and arts and culture-related fields. Overwhelmingly is the frequently echoed sentiment that Alberta's economy is overly dependent on the oil and gas industry. Nothing new there. And that while a transition is expected, it won't come easy, and it hasn't been. The role of government is also frequently a topic, and more on this later. But before drawing any conclusion, I have a burning question. What is contributing to this index? That is, what are the underlying determinants of resilience? The data is clear and consistent. Year after year, the sentiment notes corporate investment, that is, industry's confidence to finance its future, as ranking highest among those measures that were presented before you. The others that are significant are job-related, increasing unemployment, job layoffs, and decreasing job creation. So while corporate activity rates highest, followed closely by job-related measures, the measure of out-migration I want to cite as relevant because it appears that during the sustained downturn, it is actually increasing. It's up to 35% from 26% in the fall of 2017. So it is rising, and that is new. And why? It would appear that the sustained downturn is reducing the confidence of those that have come to Alberta and that they are returning home, which is quite a shift from what's occurred in previous years, where the recovery of the energy industry was expected and people hung on and waited. Also note the GDP measure is a measure treasured by economists, and it trails other measures of resilience, though interestingly enough, not in other jurisdictions. When we sampled the views of others outside of Alberta, GDP actually received the most attention. Why? Those surveyed elsewhere in Canada, namely BC and Ontario, viewed their economies as more diversified. And when they viewed their economies as more diversified, they tended to use GDP as a measure of resilience. 50% of those which we sampled in other jurisdictions said they had a resilient economy, where only 22% in Alberta. The status of their economies and diversification are apparently of more interest to Albertans than for those in BC and Ontario, where social issues prevailed. When jobs and corporate investment are failing, GDP appears to be a less relevant measure. It's jobs that are most important. I witnessed this a few months ago when meeting with my Ontario advisory. At that time, Calgary was suffering through layoffs in the tens of thousands, but the issue of economic diversification among the advisory wasn't on their radar. Instead, social issues of income disparity and social enterprise prevailed. Alberta in Canada is different. Jobs matter. Our Megatrends research in September showed a close link between changes in technology and the economy. Social change was more closely tied to regulatory, government, and political influence. So here we are in Alberta. The economy is weathering a downturn and not viewed as resilient, at least here, where corporate investment is dried up and jobs are vulnerable. As we will see next week, the impact is quite uneven. Next week, we're going to look at location and how resilience differs across the regions, across Edmonton, Calgary, and others, including northern, central, and southern Alberta. So stay tuned. This is your KEI Network. Should you have any comments and or questions, please let me know by emailing me at perry@perrykinkaide.com. In conclusion, I want to thank Tom Dodd with Fission Media and Michelle Lassard with Websites in Edmonton and Kevin McNulty with the Canadian Institute for International Trade for their help in the production of this video recording. And last but not least, a thank you to those organizations that have helped contribute to the survey's distribution and design: the Economic Developers of Alberta, the Alberta Council of Technology Society, and AB Poll Econ. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to visiting you again in episode 2.